Welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the Trump-Russia scandal keeps getting bigger and deeper as President Trump's son-in-law is being investigated by the FBI. After AlphaGo's hat trick of wins against the world's gold champion, I will speak with high-tech executive Li Kai-fu on how AI can improve our lives. U.S. President Donald Trump is now back in the White House after last week's G7 summit, hailing his first foreign trip as a big success. He faces once getting back to home, the domestic challenges he left behind. The crisis is growing after reports say Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner tried to set up a secret communications channel with the Russians.
Investigation expanded. In addition to the FBI's investigation into Russia's alleged interference with the 2016 presidential election, President Donald Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner is now under scrutiny because of both his suggestion to set up a secret communication channel with Moscow and his interactions with the Russian ambassador and a banker from Moscow. That could be a big legal problem for Kushner. He has been reportedly labeled a person of interest in the FBI investigation into possible Russian collusion within the Trump campaign. The White House has not fully denied the allegations. Trump, however, is saying allegations are false, tweeting out on Sunday morning. Whenever you see the word sources say in the fake news media and they don't mention names, it is very possible that those sources don't exist but are made up by fake news writers. News is the enemy. Shortly after Trump's remarks on Twitter, the Homeland Security Secretary went to defend his president on Sunday television news, praising any so-called back-channel communications, especially with Russia, as a good thing.
It's both normal, in my opinion, and acceptable. There's any way that you can communicate with people, particularly organizations that are maybe not particularly friendly to us, is a good thing.
If reports are true that Kushner is part of the FBI probe, then he not only appears to be the only current White House official being investigated, he'll also be the only Trump family member known to be under scrutiny. And given that President Trump fired FBI Chief Jim Comey, who was leading the investigation, and a special counsel has been appointed to lead it. What challenges would Trump's administration face? What measures would the White House take to mitigate negative impacts? And how can an administration develop international relationships while it faces allegations?
So what will become of the investigation into White House ties with Russia, and what's likely to be its ramifications for the Trump administration, both domestically and internationally? Let's check with our panelists. In New York, we have Bradley Blakeman, a Republican strategist who served on President George W. Bush's senior staff as deputy assistant to the president. Welcome to our program, sir. In Washington, we are joined by Steve Pruitt, who is the managing partner at Watts Partner. He joins us in Moscow. Also, we have Dmitry Barbish, a political analyst from the Sputnik International News Agency. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. First of all, may I go to you, Mr. Blakeman? How serious really is the investigation so far against this White House? We already have been talking about whether if there's any possibility of impeachment. Of course, that seems to be very far away from where we are, isn't it?
No doubt. Look, Democrats have been talking impeachment from the day Donald Trump was elected. They couldn't accept his presidency, and they tried to undermine him at every stage. So one thing is for sure, the FBI is investigating. We now have a special counsel appointed, and they need to do their job. But the White House will cooperate, and I don't see anything right now that will jeopardize, from what is known publicly, either Jared Kushner or the White House itself. But one thing is for sure, the only crimes that have been committed that I see are by those who leak confidential and classified information to third parties who had no business receiving that information.
All right, we see already quite a lot of trading of accusations on different camps. Mr. Pruitt, the so-called back channel of communication has been a key phrase in this overall investigation. How much do you think so far the FBI or the special investigation from the Capitol Hill really have towards those crucial to the overall White House administration?
Well, I think it's clear from what's available in the public view right now that they have tapes of telephone calls that were intercepted and probably much more information than you or I may imagine otherwise at this point. Quite frankly, following up on your previous guest's comments, I think it is early in the process. I think there's probably a good deal more information to flow forward. There are actually more investigations than the FBI and the special counsel. You've got congressional committees that are also looking into the activities. And I think given the totality of all of that insight and oversight, it's hard to imagine that there aren't going to be some facts that will come out that will be problematic. Whether or not they rise to the legal standard required for impeachment, again, I agree, it's much too early to tell.
Okay. Even though it is too early to tell, the press has been crazy about this, of course, according to some of the latest reports. For example, from the Washington Post, that Russian ambassador, Mr. Sergei Kislyak, was even taken aback by the suggestion of allowing an American to use Russian communications gear at its embassy or consulate, a proposal that would have carried security risks for Moscow as well as for the Trump team. But that was the report being mentioned in information related to what Mr. Kushner's role has been or could have been in relations to Russia during the transitional presidency. Let me ask you, Mr. Barbish, in Moscow, what do you make of these kinds of information, particularly regarding from the Russian perspective?
Well, I think that in this situation, the Russian perspective will not be very different from the perspective of any person in the world who wants peace and who wants security. I think it's a very unseemly witch hunt going on in the United States, because the accusations against Mr. Kushner, the accusation that he tried to create a back channel of how shall I call it, trusted communication between Washington and Moscow, I don't see anything criminal in that. I mean, in the worst times in Russia-US relations, in Soviet-US relations, there was a back channel. Let me remind you that basically the hotline of communication between the Kremlin and the White House was established I think after the Cuban crisis of 1962, and it was used in 1967 when there was a threat of a global conflict over the advancement of Israeli aviation into the Syrian territory.
Right.
So I don't see anything criminal, anything terrible about it. It would be terrible if there had been no trusted communication channels between Moscow and Washington, if everything had to be done in public, with the public being represented by the newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times. You know, these newspapers basically, I think, disqualified themselves during their presidential campaign in the United States. They were so anti-Trump, so obviously biased,
let me just
that I can't call them, oversight.
Let me just pick up some point you mentioned, Mr. Barbish, particularly the point to Mr. Pruitt. That is, there have been back channels for consultation between governments. Nothing can be done 100% in the public eyes. That's the argument from Mr. Barbish. That has also been the argument coming from some of the diplomats, in fact, and also people on foreign relations in Washington. So what is wrong this time with the so-called back channel?
Well, there's nothing in theory wrong with back channels. I think they're used internationally. They're also used domestically here. When I worked in the Congress, there were back channel communications between Democrats and Republicans on a daily basis that were carried out. The issue here, I think, is the intent, and that's what we don't really know the answer to. And until we get the answer to what was the intent of the back channel, As your guest in Moscow points out, there were specific events and activities that were going on where the communication that needed to take place couldn't, for a number of reasons, take place in the public eye. So I think let's figure out and let's find out what the intent was, and then we can make a fair and balanced judgment of whether or not what Mr. Kushner was doing was indeed either purposeful and within the confines of the law, or whether his intent was somehow filled with malice.
Mr. Blakeman, you heard from the other two guests. One is saying, well, there were those cases back, so-called channels of communication. It happened with President Obama when it comes to Cuba issues. It happened with former Soviet Union, with the United States. It even happens between Beijing and Washington, D.C. during the days before the diplomatic relations was opened between the two countries. So, but now there seems to be a purpose issue. What exactly is that purpose? Do you agree with what Mr. Pruitt just said?
Yes, I think that it's perfectly normal to have or establish back-channel communications. The question is, what was not only the intent, but what actually occurred during those back-channel communications. I'm under the belief, if you read the press, that it was never consummated. There was an idea of back-channel communications, but it was never actually effectuated. So, you know, here we have an idea, but it was never done. So what harm is being done by suggesting back-channel communication with some entity, especially the Russians, who are not only an adversary, but are needed in order to have the kind of world order we all hope, and that's a peaceful coexistence.
Mr. Pruitt, I have to throw it back to you. How would you judge, in other words, the so-called intent? If nothing has been done, how can you judge the purpose of it, and how can you convince the others of the so-called intent?
Well, last week I was having a conversation with a particular Republican U.S. senator who I won't name. He asked me my advice on how he should handle this matter, and I said, follow the evidence wherever it leads and then take what actions are appropriate. I think that's what we are stuck with for action plan at this point. The evidence will speak for itself. I think as it relates to the Soviet Union, what this really shows is the day-to-day interaction between the U.S. and many of our friends and allies and so-called foes around the world. That the intelligence gathering that goes on is massive, that what is known within the confines of that community. And now that there's so many people looking and asking, that information will come out. I hope it comes out, quite frankly, in fairness to both Mr. Kushner and to all the parties involved through the course of the investigation.
Okay.
I do agree that with a lot of the criticism about the leaks,
but
that's not good on either side of the equation.
Yeah, but Mr. Pruitt, before we go to the leaks, which is a big issue, let me ask you continuously about this. I mean, at this point, you see President Trump arguing Mr. Kushner has been playing a significant role in making this bridge between the United States and some of the other countries, Israel, for example, and also Saudi Arabia. He brings in a lot of investment into the United States as well, and also with Russia. So what about those points? Are they eligible, do you think, when it comes to investigation of what role Mr. Kushner has been playing? Meanwhile, what would all of this investigation, which could go a long, long time, means for the governance capability of the Trump administration? Mr. Pruitt.
Well, let me answer your last part first. Sure. I think this has the potential of paralyzing all activity from the Trump administration unless they do as many who are suggesting now, and that is compartmentalize this, set up a whole separate operation to deal with it, and take it out of their day-to-day governance activities. I'm quite frankly not optimistic that that's going to happen because the way Mr. Trump has historically operated, he's been a hands-on manager, and he's going to want to have his hands involved in this. Or at the minimum, he'll be having his tweets involved in it. So I think they need to compartmentalize this first to avoid the parallelization. Secondly, as far as, again, going back to the back channel communications, I'm sure, given the nature of some of the other things that have shown themselves so far in this administration, that there's been communications going on that we're not aware of with a lot of countries and a lot of players. And I think maybe I'll stop at that point, other than to say that that's good. We need to be talking to our neighbors and our friends around the world, and I quite frankly would be concerned if they weren't talking to our friends and neighbors around the world.
Mr. Blakeman, a lot really wonder whether it's inside the United States through party lines or outside the United States. Is this more about internal politics, the whole investigation and the different kinds of leaks and questions related to them? Or is it about the governance style of an administration? Or this is about the overall way that the United States is likely to proceed in the next few years, given its own challenges now? Mr. Blakeman.
Well, I think it's all the above. Certainly, the president's adversaries are trying to attack him, the same as they've attacked him in other ways since he's elected. Look, the bottom line, I think, is this. The White House needs to cooperate. I agree with Mr. Pruitt. They need to let the investigation run its course without as much public comment or criticism that can be out of the White House or from any other source. But the only crimes that I've seen committed so far are that by the leakers. And I think the president needs to task his attorney general and the FBI with finding the leakers and bringing them to justice. We cannot run a government by having government sources that are unauthorized leaking confidential and classified information that has done more harm to this country than anything that's alleged the president so far has done.
Mr. Barbich, you also seems to go into the line of accusing the leaks. But given all of these leaks, would there be trust from foreign governments, from your perspective, toward Washington in doing things with the current administration? Is this likely to lead to the paralysis of this whole governance as we speak?
Well, in Russia, I must tell you that there is that widespread misjudgment in the West that Russia was enthusiastic about Mr. Trump. No. The problem is that in Russia, the majority of people have a very positive image of the United States, especially in the elite. That's despite all the problems that we had in the last 25 years. So the hope was that Mr. Obama's administration was so terrible. It created so many conflicts, you know, the conflict in Libya, the conflict in Syria, the conflict in Ukraine, that it simply can't be worse. So Mr. Trump is going to bring something new into the Russia-US relations. Unfortunately, we see how Mr. Trump is being prevented from doing that. And not only by the establishment in Washington, not only by the leakers, but also by some politicians of the European Union, for example. I was entertained, you know, in the last 2 days when Mr. Trump met the head of the European Council, Donald Tusk, who actually called Mr. Trump, let me quote it, a threat to European security. He has been calling Mr. Trump that for 3 months.
So your point is, Mr. Barbich,
this is the irresponsible talk. Yes, my point is that Mr. Trump is simply hampered from doing anything positive, both by his so-called allies in Europe and by a part of the Washington establishment.
Well, Mr.
And I'm not sure that the leakers will be brought to justice, because it is clear that the leakers have helped certain circles, not only in the Democratic Party, but generally in the anti-Trump establishment. They helped them to achieve their aims. Let me remind you that Mr. Flynn was basically removed. His removal was based on a leak which
Okay,
was
Mr.
used by
Puig,
the Washington Post
I have
and which
to-
became a huge affair.
I have to
although
let
it was
Mr.
just a
Puig
leak.
to talk also. Give him some space to talk as well. Mr. Puig, I have to let you handle within 40 seconds the leak issue. Whose fault is it? Should leak and could leaks lead us to real truth?
Well, the leaks have already led up to truth. I mean, all we have to do is look at the most recent incident in Manchester in the UK and the evidence that was leaked there, which probably will have some bearing on our ability to find and convict the players in that episode. So, yes, leaks are dangerous. They can be very dangerous. They can be very enlightening. But we've got to be much more circumspect, and I chalk a lot of this up to the fact that there's no real infrastructure around President Trump to protect him from these leaks.
Steve Pruitt, Bradley Blakeman, Dmitry Barbich. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Even though you have very different views, that's exactly why we're having a debate and discussion about it. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN. Still to come on our program. For our last episode of AI and EU, I speak with high-tech executive Kai-Fu Lee on what careers will immune from AI competition. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live Monday to Friday on CGTN. Google's AlphaGo, the AI developed to tackle the world's most demanding strategy game, Go, is stepping down from competitive matches after defeating the world's best. The latest challenger is Go's top-ranked player, Ke Jie, who lost 3-0 in the tournament hosted in China last week. According to its developer, DeepMind, the next stage will be for AI to tackle some of the society's most complex problems. Although AlphaGo has cast its last competitive stone, the discussions on the AI development have not ceased at all.
AlphaGo has handily beat Ke Jie, the #1 human Go player in the world. In the rivalry's third match on Saturday afternoon, 19-year-old Ke failed to claw back as AlphaGo won a clean sweep of all 3 matches. Meanwhile, on Friday, 5 Chinese world champions teamed up to take on the machine, but they were defeated as well. And that is not the first time a machine beat a human champion. 20 years ago, Deep Blue, a chess-playing computer developed by IBM, defeated chess world champion Garry Kasparov. The result hinted at the future of AI. Now AI is seeping its way into our lives. From voice-powered personal assistants like Siri to vehicles, AI is affecting how we live, work, and entertain ourselves. Even when people take a selfie, some apps will use AI to determine how to make us more beautiful. But compared to all the eyeballs it creates, how far is AI from becoming an indispensable part of our lives?
To answer that important question, I went to Kai-Fu Lee, the founder and CEO of Sinovation Venture and a strong advocate of AI, artificial intelligence. Over the past few decades, he has been the China CEO of Google and an independent venture capitalist. But he also has spiced up his career with on and off work on artificial intelligence, mentoring of young entrepreneurs, and maintaining a social media presence of over 50 million followers in China alone. Visiting his office in Beijing can boost one's confidence in the potential of AI as he explains how AI has tapped into his ongoing projects.
A lot of these are AI-based investments. For example, Xiaoyu is a product that's basically a home robot.
And a lot of colorful stuff.
Yeah, this is a. This will in the future also have voice interface. It's a levitating speaker. Isn't that cool? It's got a kind of robot look.
Yeah.
It doesn't really move yet. You can see Amazon Echo going into this kind of scenario, right? And then this has a, it's flying. There's nothing connected.
It is, and this one is really cute.
Well, this is a toy. So it's a little toy that you can program. It's
Yeah.
very good for teaching kids about AI.
How to do that?
Well, you can use a phone to control it.
Yeah.
Teach you to play a song after you. The new version of this can actually play basketball. It can throw balls, and you can program it to move forward, throw a ball, and you can have two robots play against each other.
So all I need is this on the table.
It could be anywhere. Well, it's more for kids to learn about AI, right? It's about education.
Well, as a venture capitalist, of course, Dr. Li is passionate about AI, but as a journalist, I need to look past the novel and lighthearted games AI and humans have played and ask him some fundamental questions related to our future with this technology. It seems that Dr. Li also agrees that we'd better see the big picture.
For games, there's the best people in the world cannot beat AI. But I think it's time to move on to the real business applications where there's direct business value that's being created. So in financial applications, in robotic applications, in medical applications, I think AI is going to blossom and create a lot of value. And that's what we should really focus on. In the next 10 to 15 years, it should easily replace 50% of human jobs and human
That's
effort.
exactly what I want to follow up with. I know you are much more into science than I am, which is liberal arts, but still you have to help us understand where does your number come from, 50% of the job, because you've been talking about this all over the world.
Okay. So Oxford University did a study over the 7,000 job categories in the world, and they did an extrapolation of to what degree AI can replace those jobs. And they decomposed the jobs into parts of the jobs. So for example, loan officer is one example, someone who determines to lend the money to you or not.
Right.
An assistant will have many components, a receptionist, and accountant, paralegal, a reporter. So they took many components of those jobs and they aggregated what percentage of those jobs are repetitive, are possible to collect big data, and it's possible for the big data driven AI to be better than person. So that's kind of the cognitive part of replacing humans, right? It goes all the way from the jobs I mentioned all the way up to radiologists, which could be partially replaced. And then they did a percentage of people whose jobs or percentages of whose jobs could be replaced. So it has real numerical basis. And then there is the manual labor replacement, which is actually probably a little bit larger than the cognitive replacement.
Give me some examples.
So driver,
Yes.
factory floor worker, construction worker, repairmen are the manual labor that are projected to be replaced. The first ones will actually probably be assembly line factory worker, right? People who are stationary in nature and just putting things together, not very skilled. The second type would be the construction worker. On the internet, you can see robots that lay bricks much better than people. So it's not every type of construction, maybe the ones that require modest level of dexterity. And then you go on to drivers, right? Drivers alone are close to 10% of the world's population. So when autonomous vehicle takes off, basically all the drivers will be replaced.
So that's where the 50% come from.
So they're adding up, a few percent at a time, total about 50%. The reason to be optimistic is that each such AI replacing a human is creating a huge economic value and technological progress. And I think very few governments and corporations can resist the temptation to let its technology race ahead and to reap the reward from the economic value being created.
But come on, Kefu, I mean, you were in AI research back in the 1980s, beginning from that period of time. You've seen these ups and downs, and people are excited, overexcited, and then pessimistic about the whole thing. And this, again, this time, is it yesterday once more?
I don't think so.
No, not really?
Because back in my PhD days, the algorithms were not nearly good enough. the amount of data we have was not nearly good enough, the computers were not fast enough, and also, as a result, I and my colleagues never made such projections, right? So this is the first time.
Okay,
that,
I can testify to that.
Yeah, that's right, right. You've
This
interviewed
is the very
me.
first time.
That's right. The first time we're making those projections.
On the one hand, we all know, quote unquote, this wolf can be good, can be bad in different ways.
Right.
It's coming.
Yep.
And yet we are not really preparing for it.
What do we do about the displaced people? What do we do about education? And how do we narrow the gap between the haves and have-nots? How do we prevent the successful AI companies from becoming too powerful and too rich?
Whose job is it to think about all these questions you just raised? Is that your job, Kai-Fu?
I think all of us have to play our part.
Innovation Ventures, the thing that you're doing, has a lot to do with the future development of technology. So you're certainly coming at it from a business and venture capitalist perspective. So let me ask you from that perspective.
Okay.
Will there be too much concentration of data, too much concentration of access to data and privacy and information from the business?
Well, the businesses that have a lot of data will gather even more data. I'd like to think they're behaving reasonably, but I think the best way to check, to provide checks and balances for them, is to encourage much greater competition, to have 100 or 1,000 companies like them competing for users with them and providing solutions with them, and each with its access to a certain amount of data, but not giving any one company
But these are unicorns. I mean, it's very hard to rival against them because they have enjoyed quite a golden period of time over the other future competitors. Is it ever possible to create this competition? You said yourself 5 to 10 years. Is it ever possible?
Well, the worst case is that they may become dominant, and then antitrust laws may have to come in to check them.
The other thing is the access to information for the public to understand about the technologies.
Yeah. Well, first, I don't personally own any of your information. I'm not Baidu or Tencent.
No.
But I think users do need a certain degree of knowledge as to how much privacy they're giving away for convenience. I mean, the game today that is being played is these internet giants are taking all of your privacy information and hopefully keeping it from getting out. And I think they're doing a decent job at it. We don't read about too many leakages. And they're providing you great convenience, right? So when you go on Taobao, the things you see are things you actually want to buy. When you go on Tencent, you have ease of interacting with your network of friends. So it's currently, the current model that's working in China, US, and anywhere is a model of implied trust, where I, as a user, give up my private information to the internet giants, and in exchange I get convenience, and so far they haven't done anything to lose my trust. That is a fragile balance, and I hope there are more laws and media and checks and balances and competition that will keep it that way.
But Kai-Fu, the question really should be, how can we let AI to work with us?
Yes, that's a very good point too.
As an assistance,
yeah,
as a tool,
yeah,
rather than let it dominate what we will already have and what we will have in the future. How much have effort been put into that category?
I think there are some big opportunities there, but I don't want to be too optimistic because AI will improve rapidly with more data. So let's take doctors. Let's take cancer diagnosis as an example, right? Let's say a doctor for a particular type of, let's say, lung cancer can properly identify and save, let's say, hypothetically, 70 out of 100 patients.
Right.
Okay? And let's say the first AI tool that comes out probably won't be that good. Maybe it will save 50. But the doctor using that tool together maybe can save 73. So that's 3 more persons saved thanks to the tool. But if we move time forward another 5 years, that same tool or a better tool with more data may be able to save 80 lives.
That's right.
Now the doctor has to work hard to, together working with the tool, save maybe 83. So that 3 extra lives is the value the doctor has to add. But I think I have to be realistic on this show and tell you, if the AI tool can go from 50 to 80, it will probably go to 90, 95, and 99. At some point, the human cannot add any more value. It's going to be like, okay, I can spend 5 years and maybe save 1 more life. The marginal benefit of the user will be diminishing because the AI tool will get so good with more data. That might be 30 years away, but that day will come. So I think the simple 1 + 1 = 3 human machine symbiotic do better quantitatively is a optimistic scenario for the long term. Probably not going to be happening. However, but I do think the following scenario will be realistic.
What is it?
The doctor will be more of a human-to-human compassion connector. So the tool will largely be good enough, and the human cannot do a better job in terms of the diagnosis.
Right.
But maybe the tool will say, will come out with specific numbers. Do these tests. After the test, determine here is a 4th stage lymphoma with a 70% chance of dying in 5 years, within 5 years. But the doctor won't be the code pronouncer of that death sentence to the patient. The doctor instead will talk to the patient and say, well, you know, there's this guy, Kai-Fu Lee, he had the same kind of lymphoma. He fought it. He took this chemotherapy. That's what I'm going to prescribe for you. I think if you keep up, you should have a shot just like he did, right? That kind of giver of confidence, listening to the patient, maybe visiting the patient at home, always taking a call when the patient calls, which our doctors currently probably cannot do, will actually create more doctors' jobs than there are today. But the job is different. It's not an end-to-end diagnosis and human interface. It's just the interface.
But what if? There is always a what if.
Yeah.
As things change, as you said, it is quantitative, and yet things could change dramatically once it reached a certain level. So what if AI takes on life of its own? Is there a possibility?
You have to ask that question, the dystopia question. One cannot rule out that possibility. But one
cannot rule out whether AI could in the future develop its own emotions.
One cannot rule that out.
Yeah.
But we also can't rule out that one day we could fly, or rule out that, you know,
we couldn't.
Biological warfare destroys mankind. Anything is possible. This is possible. But it's not possible to extrapolate from the engineering algorithms today to say, oh, I'll develop it and one day that will happen. In my mind, I can see engineering algorithms improving cancer detection, diagnosis, and improving to a level way beyond human in the next 20, 30 years. I think it's almost a certainty. I can just imagine the types of algorithms that we already have, plus more data, plus more algorithms, and so on, with no breakthroughs. But the emotion, the love, the self-replication, taking a mind of its own, self-awareness, control human, that's all still just in our imagination. It's not based on any solid scientific evidence. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's possible, but there's no way to connect the dots at this point. So I would probably delay that debate and focus more on the real problems of employment and education, things like that.
But you see, Kai-Fu, with your experience in the tech world, you see a trend of new technologies being applied for 20 or 30 years before another new trend comes in and takes its place. Earlier we have the social media, which is still going on right now. We are using the benefits of it. And well, at the same time, AI is already coming. So one would argue, you know, even if there is AI, whether we will be able to develop its full potential, to what extent before the next trend takes its place, is an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there will be multiple trends, and they will happen at the same time, faster than ever before.
Exactly, because of AI.
And related to it, and not only because of it. For example, I think virtual reality, augmented reality, Internet of Things, wearable computing, those things will all emerge. and they'll be related to AI, but a little bit different, but they'll reinforce each other.
Right.
So we're going to be really seeing multiple tech revolutions hitting us simultaneously and mutually reinforcing. This will be, in the next 10 years, it'll be more than the entire, human history.
That's true. What about for you, finally? I
Yeah.
mean, all of this exciting development while you are being an advocate of AI, you even write a book recently about it,
Yes.
and talking about it all over the world. You're being quoted widely. There's a lot of danger in that. In terms
Yes.
of, are you betting on the right thing?
Yeah, well, I'm actually generally pretty cautious and pretty accurate. So if you go back at my track record, I think it's pretty decent. I predicted the mobile phones and Android in 2008. In 2011, on the worldwide media, I predicted that Chinese people will stop paying cash and start using their phones, even though there wasn't even WeChat. So I think there's good reasons to listen to me when I make a prediction.
I will listen to you, Kai-Fu, and looking forward to future discussions with you about all the latest development.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kai-Fu.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thanks.
That is Kai-Fu Lee, founder and CEO of Sinovation Ventures and also president of the AI Institute. He's recently writing a book called Artificial Intelligence. The enthusiasm for AI is spreading in China. While it is not about one country outsmarting another, it is a new development where no one wants to lag behind in both research and applications. I hope you have learned how to welcome this exciting trend in our series over the past few days, AI and You. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Tian Weibo as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on World Insight with Tian Wei team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.